often considered the primary tool in the fight for workers' rights.
We are the union. We are the union.
By coming together in a workplace and harnessing their collective power, workers have won safer workplaces, increased wages, and better benefits. While there's debate about whether unions are the best way to strengthen working people's power, it's clear that workers want something to change. A recent Gallup poll shows public support for labor unions at a historic high, with 72% of people between the ages of 18 and 34 having a positive view of them. But what's the future for unions when an estimated 1 in 10 people work as independent contractors in a job market with high turnover and a growing gig economy? And most importantly, how do you organize them? Welcome to Shifting Terrain. I'm Rachel Rybacek, a working-class sociologist who's spent a long time thinking about class and race. I'm having conversations with experts and everyday people to amplify the cultural and political issues both capturing and dividing America's working class today. In today's episode, we're getting into the specifics of some massive companies that have exploded over the last decade. From Uber to DoorDash to Amazon, these companies of consumer convenience have allowed for worker exploitation and abuse in new ways. We're starting with Italo Medelius, a worker at an Amazon facility in Durham, North Carolina, as well as secretary of the independent union CAUSE, the Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment. CAUSE was started in 2022 by two Amazon workers known as Rev Ryan and Mom Mary after working conditions deteriorated even further during the pandemic. They continue their steadfast organizing despite the union-busting tactics of the multi-trillion multinational company. So how have you all been organizing workers? What strategies are you finding effective for growing your membership?
The word union carries a lot of weight for, people that aren't super involved in unionization, and it carries a lot of negative context, especially in the South. So the first things that we need to do are bring people in more of in a social manner. Invite them to a cookout or invite them to something that is less business or union heavy and get them to know us as people. So we've been doing barbecues and cookouts. We put out tents in front of the warehouses now as a strategy and give out free food. We were actually arrested for doing that. And things are working when Amazon sends the police after you and has us arrested.
So Amazon called the police on you all giving out the free food?
Yes, multiple times. We're on the clock, on company time, and we're just, talking to our coworkers and handing out free food. But since we were on Amazon property, what Amazon said is that we were soliciting, even though we are the workers inside of Amazon. They sent the cops after us. They arrested 3 of our people. And then we shifted strategy and we set up a tent right on the border of Amazon property. Then they tried calling the cops on us again, and that failed because the police said you can't arrest people on public property. But then what Amazon did is they built a wall, essentially separating us from the warehouse. And that wall is still up today, and it has security outposts. It looks like a military camp from the outside.
Why are you open to organizing a union?
I think to me, it's just logical and I think the most reasonable way to change our work conditions. Forming a union under United States law, if it is a recognized union under the NLRB, it would allow us to negotiate a contract that would be mandatory for the company to have to follow. And even if it's not a recognized union, we have a lot of power in numbers as workers. And I think that the best way to get such a large corporation like Amazon to change companies across continents is only from within. And of course, it's an uphill battle because they pour so much money into union busting and people leave Amazon really quickly. But it's for those exact reasons that we need to set things down in policy to change the way that Amazon systematically treats its workers. And the only way to do that is through a union, whether recognized or unrecognized.
Can you say how you're different from a traditional union and why you didn't seek affiliation with an established or pre-existing union?
Yes, so we are proudly a part of the independent union movement, and we were inspired by the first and only unionized Amazon facility in JFK 8 in Staten Island. And the way that they started off was an organic movement of workers within the warehouse And the union drive was led by those same workers that work inside of the warehouse. In 2022, we circulated a petition that had a lot of different demands on it. It was really hot inside of the warehouse, so we wanted fans. We also demanded a jury system of our peers for people to be able to challenge firings and stuff like that. And we won a lot of those things just by organizing our workers. So in late 2022, we decided, hey, it's time to form a union. And we wanted to do it the traditional way. So we reached out to the Teamsters, to the United Mine Workers, to RWDSU.
What does that stand for?
The retail workers and department stores. And ultimately, after doing interviews with them, we decided to go with RWDSU. But the relationship very quickly deteriorated because a lot of our membership felt that we weren't being listened to, that we didn't have the autonomy that we wanted to have. And it felt like a lot of the organizing strategies just weren't working because Amazon is such a unique place to organize inside, and traditional labor tactics just don't work.
So you mentioned that there are people who have had negative experiences being in unions in the past, but you were able to convince some people. How and why did people change their minds?
One of the things about Amazon is that it is primed to piss people off that work there. The conditions are terrible, but people are ready to join a union. The question is, how do you get past these preconceived notions about what a union is? People are, especially working class people, are very logical. What is going to get me the best bang for my buck? So we have to explain, if you are going to pay dues, this is what it would get you. We have to explain to people how a contract negotiation works. We have to explain to people why we want $30 an hour. So the majority of flips from no to yes came from having long conversations, allowing people to ask questions and, not being offended by them, allowing people to question us, and then presenting a logical argument as to why we are the best choice. It really was a decision between management and the union. Which one is it going to be? And I will also say, Amazon, they're the best union busters around. They stoke racial division, fear tactics, and they really, really know what they're doing.
So are there people who were part of your organizing who decided they didn't want to participate anymore, and not because they left Amazon as a worker, but because they had a change of heart?
Yes. Amazon at first, they were caught off guard. They didn't think that we were going to be able to collect enough union authorization cards to get to an election. But as soon as we did, they went into full union busting mode. So they were doing everything from playing a 30-second video that was on a loop inside of the warehouse with a former Teamster saying how horrible unions were, fear-mongering about people losing their jobs. They blacked out all of the windows in the break room so that people would only hear this 30-second loop. People were going crazy inside of this warehouse. They flew in managers from all over the continent to walk the floors and intimidate people into voting no. On the voting area, they put up an entire stage and did vote no rallies every day. They would give people time off work to go to these vote no rallies. And we have a manager on video saying that he heard that if people vote no, Cause is going to have them deported, because they knew that we were not going to be able to win the election without Hispanic support. And that really tanked a lot of our Hispanic support. The fear-mongering was unreal. A lot of people that were going to vote yes, that were active members of our union, fell off and told us, right, that they agree with the union, but they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to get deported.
So you all did not win the election to have a recognized union, is that right?
That's right.
So where do you go from here? Where have you been going from here?
From here, we have been moving forward and continuing to organize. So one of the things that is very important to us is learning from history and learning from other similar groups of people that have taken on very large empires. And we are taking on one of the largest corporate empires in the history of the world. So For us, the loss wasn't a sour defeat. It was a gift. We learned what we did wrong. We are still building at RDU1, which is our flagship warehouse of about 5,000 people. We're going to be launching our Durham campaign, where we already have flourishing organizing committees in all four warehouses, and we're just getting bigger and bigger. And we feel very confident that we are going to win.
What makes you so confident that the workers who are terrified of losing their jobs, who rely on this income in some parts of the state where there aren't other options necessarily, what makes you so confident that this is the time?
Being inside of those warehouses, and I've been inside of multiple now, as time goes on, I started in 2022, and the desperation is palpable in 2025. You have people that literally sleep in their cars in a parking lot of Amazon. Some of our union members, sleep in their cars. You have most people that have another job or two other jobs just to be able to keep a roof over their head. So the conversations that you have in the break rooms, the conversations that you have on the floor when it's worker to worker, these are conversations of desperation. These are conversations of, what am I going to do with my future? Do I even have a future? And I think that in 2025, we really are in a place where people are willing to throw something at the wall and see what sticks.
As you've already mentioned, working people can be suspicious of unions. Do you see that happening?
I do think that traditional unions, based on the models of the 1920s and 30s, they need to evolve, because I do think that a lot of those tactics are about dividing the working class. In the Amazon context, the way that I see it is that Amazon is using those divide and conquer tactics to defeat us. So our job as an independent union is to retain the good things from traditional union organizing and bring in more modern ways of thinking about unionizing a workplace like Amazon, which is so different than everything else. A lot of people call it the modern day plantation, because that really is what it looks like in there. There are class and race differences between management and the workers, but very little class differences between the workers ourselves. We are all stuck kind of in the same place. You can't get a raise after working 3 years at Amazon. So after you work 3 years, you're stuck. Amazon crafts policies to make sure that people don't stay for longer than 3 years. They like that turnover. So the job, as we see it, of the union is to unite the workers across all of our differences. So across race, across education. There are people that work at Amazon that have a high school degree. There's people at Amazon that have PhDs and master's degrees. There's people at Amazon, especially immigrants, that were doctors back in their home countries, orthodontists, lawyers. So it's a very diverse group of people that are all stuck in the same economic class. But the trick is, how do you unite them together under that idea of economic class across our differences? We are both workers. We are both being screwed by the same person, which is Amazon. So we need to come together across our differences. And that really is the trick.
While Italo is in a battle to build a union within Amazon, our next guest, Brian Dolber, Associate Professor of Communication and Media Studies at California State University San Marcos and rideshare organizer, is working on a book called Start Me Up, Rideshare Drivers United Struggle for Worker Democracy in the Shadow of Silicon Valley. Drawing on his experience and research, Brian will talk about how workers without a shared workplace still found a way to successfully organize. What are three main things you've learned from your research and your organizing?
So one thing that I've learned is that rideshare drivers particularly, but I think workers more broadly, want to be part of organizations that they have a voice in. So rather than the model that we've seen of union organizing over the last couple of decades, where paid staff create the campaign and basically determine the strategy and run everything in order to, get as many people on board as possible once that union has been created and there's a contract in place, and things tend to kind of die down. what workers, I think, really want to see is a chance to participate in creating their own working conditions and creating their own organization. The gig economy was appealing to so many people because they were dissatisfied with what their jobs looked like. And a lot of people left those jobs when, these apps first started, maybe 15 years ago, thinking that this was going to be a better deal. And what so many people have found is that this was a con job, that they're not able to make enough money to get by, that they don't have the benefits, that they don't have the rights that traditional employment secured, really going back to the New Deal period.
If these workers want to organize and they don't want a traditional union model, why aren't we seeing more of these pop up?
Right. I think that is really a question of strategy, and it's a question of resources. And those two things work together. In order to organize at the scale that we would need to beat back the largest corporations, right? And we're in a moment where there's enormous concentration of wealth, there's an enormous concentration in markets. So you need enormous numbers of workers in order to fight back that level of corporate power. In order to do that, you need the resources. Unions right now do have the resources to organize workers, but too often they've been timid about putting those resources into play where workers actually have a say in how they build their own organizations. So Rideshare Drivers United is such an interesting and important example because, this is a group of workers that back in 2017 began talking to each other at LAX airport. And with the help of an app that was designed for their own purposes by a developer who met with workers and saw what their needs were, a app called Solidarity Tech. It was designed for the purposes of worker organizing. And so it allows for drivers to communicate with each other through encrypted text and phone calls. But it's also then set up to, when you're talking to people, organizers typically rate other workers on whether they're a leader, whether they're an activist, whether they're disengaged. So it allows for all of those functions. It allows for mass texting. It allows for all of the things that you would need in a campaign.
When you were talking about people leaving their jobs in 2017, where these gig economy jobs were popping up, and specifically rideshare driving, let's say for the ones who are dissatisfied with a traditional workplace, they decide, I'm going to work for myself effectively by being a Uber driver. But some would argue, well, that's why you get a traditional job, is because then the boss has to deal with and absorb the costs of your health insurance, maybe your retirement account if they're building one. And so that's just what comes with the territory. And if you're not making enough money hourly as an entrepreneurial rideshare driver, well, you need to hustle more.
Right. And that's really where the lie of the gig economy comes in, because no matter how much you hustle, the way that these businesses are structured is that the algorithm is the determining factor in how much work you get and in how much you're getting paid. And, these companies have actually changed their practices where years ago there were more consistent standards of, if you drive X number of miles, you'll get paid X amount. And what happened really at the time that Uber and Lyft went public is they moved towards what they call upfront pricing. And so they're really doing everything to manipulate how much people are getting paid. During those wait times, they're off the clock, which means that companies have an enormous advantage to press people's income to keep them off the clock and make them wait longer and longer, to make them more desperate to then take even less lucrative fares when they do give them to them. So the idea that these workers are independent contractors when they have very little control actually over how much they're making or what their working conditions are, that was really the big lie of the gig economy.
Part of the moment we're in with the labor movement and organizing workers is this classification between an employee versus an independent contractor, and that historically unions have been organizing employees.
That's right. And so there are some examples, right, that we can look at where independent contractors or workers not considered full employees have organized. In New York City, taxi drivers are independent contractors, but the New York Taxi Workers Alliance has built an organization where even though they don't have collective bargaining rights, they've been able to come together and exercise a lot of political power.
You refer to drivers as not making very much money. Do you have a dollar figure?
Yeah, so I could talk about California specifically. And Prop 22 is the law that Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and some of the other big app platforms ponied up $250 million in 2020 to lock California gig workers into independent contractor status and prevent them from organizing. And so what that did was it said basically that there really is no floor for how low drivers could make. So we looked at not just what people are bringing in, but also what they're paying out and the differential in what it would be to be considered an employee versus an independent contractor, because probably the biggest savings that companies are getting is they're not paying on the mileage, right? And so in the US, if you're an employee and you're driving, you're supposed to be getting reimbursed at a rate of, I believe now it's 61 cents per mile. For drivers, that's like sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars that are getting lost. So when you take out all the expenses, when you take out the tax differential, we estimated that drivers are making as little as $4.30 an hour. Yeah.
So for anybody who's like, how low are we really talking? Very low.
And this is in the most expensive places in the country, right? This is, the research we did was in California, Los Angeles, San Francisco. This is where, rents are higher than almost anywhere in the country.
Are there one or two other things you would share that are really important for people to understand about what's happening right now in the gig economy specifically?
If we look at politics and distrust in longstanding institutions is, rampant throughout the country and throughout the culture and throughout the world, right? This isn't just a US thing. So in a moment when we have more and more people saying that they want to be in unions, but fewer and fewer people are, right? I think we have to ask, what do they actually want to be part of, especially when these institutions are being questioned, whether it's government, media, corporations. We need to see that unions need to be responsive to that as well and actually allow workers to have a voice in their own organization. If drivers only see an organization as telling them what to do, as not really fulfilling the promises that people have of when they hear a union, they think, oh, now I'm going to have benefits. Now I'm going to have, stable wages. I'm going to have a middle-class life. If they don't make good on those promises as an outside entity, and they don't allow people to organize themselves to fight for those things, then, we risk just breeding more and more cynicism about a really important type of organization, especially as we're coming up against authoritarianism right now.
Another massive app-based industry is delivery drivers bringing everything from food to prescriptions to alcohol to customers' doors. Ligia Gualpa has been supporting their efforts to win fair wages, safer conditions, and even access to bathrooms as the executive director of the Brooklyn-based Workers' Justice Project. Ligia, tell us about your organization and how it started.
Yeah, so Workers' Justice Project, it's a worker center whose mission is to organize and win better working conditions for low-wage workers, particularly for gig workers who work as day laborers, house cleaners, and in the last 5 years, we've been focusing on raising industry standards for 80,000 app delivery workers. And we started really coming together to strategize about how we're going to win better working conditions so workers, especially essential immigrant New Yorkers, can have opportunities for a better life and better working conditions in industries that are so essential to our city's economy.
What strategies are you finding effective for growing this membership? Given that it's different industries, how are you bringing everyone together?
One of the things I think the most effective strategies of a worker center is one, building a safe space within the organization where people feel welcome. We play a central role as emergency responders as well. So part of our role is also responding to critical needs of the community. Most recently, with app delivery workers, we have seen a massive unjust deactivation that it really it's a form of firing. You have corporations who have chosen to fire workers as a form of punishment when they cannot deliver food on time. So we recently decided to create a case management process to support workers appealing those deactivation while also advocating for better policies to force the companies to create a fair appeal process, but also end the cruel practice of unjust deactivation.
Was there any sort of turning point for organizing gig workers for you all, or has it been a steady increase?
During the pandemic, we saw how multi-billion-dollar corporations responded to urging need of New Yorkers, which is having the convenience of accessing food and medicine and other goods through a convenient way. And they use the online platform economy to respond to a need, but also use that need as a way to profit on the back of immigrant workers. So what we saw was an explosion of the app delivery economy. But that comes at a human cost, right? They're generating billions of dollars by underpaying workers, treating app delivery workers as disposable labor, stripping them away of basic labor rights by classifying them as independent contractors. Because as independent contractors, they no longer have to comply by paying workers the city's minimum wage nor provide workers' compensation. And they hire about 80,000 app delivery workers to run their business model. But at the same time, making billions of dollars by overcharging and overpricing consumers with fees that they cannot even justify, and also overcharging fees from the restaurants, right? So they have built this entire economy that now New Yorkers depend on by offering no rights and no protections to delivery workers. And on the other hand, you have these companies running a very similar marketing approach that is trying to appeal to workers to saying you can become your own boss, you would make enough money, probably more than what traditionally you make, making it appealing that this is the promised future of a job that will give you freedom, flexibility, and better jobs and income. But in reality, that's not true, right? Like this entire business is built on lies. And what the public don't know is that with app delivery, this work has become one of the deadliest jobs in New York City, where about 30 workers have died in the last 4 years. About 50% of the workforce have reported being injured. About 60 have reported saying that they don't have access to healthcare. And it wasn't until we started organizing 3 years ago, most recently, we were able to secure a minimum pay of $21.44.
What are some of the other wins that you've achieved? I mean, it's a pretty short time you're organizing, yeah?
Yes, so we also passed a law that would allow workers to set their own distance, decide how far they want to travel so they can prioritize their safety. The other one is forcing restaurants to open their bathrooms, right? That was like a human rights issue, being able to use a restroom while you're working on a shift. Most recently, we won thanks to the partnership of the AG. The AG was able to secure a settlement of close to $17 million from DoorDash, who recognized that they were stealing tips. They were using tips to offer the base pay that they were promising.
And so, what are the ways you're able to achieve these wins?
So, one is policy innovation. We're consistently thinking about what kind of protections workers need, and we advocate for better policies, especially at the city council level. The other thing is we do workers' rights co-enforcement, which means we support workers who are dealing, which the company is probably violating certain rights, at least under the current protections that they have. And we help them bring forward those cases through case management. Organizing these days have been sort of so essential for the survival of everyday working people. And that was the story of Los Deliveristas Unidos. Here we have a group of people who existed even before the pandemic, right? Who have been doing delivery work for decades. But nobody dared to recognize that these workforce existed and that they needed a protection. It wasn't until they formed Los Deliveristas Unidos, until they marched and mobilized together as an organizing force from Times Square to City Hall, and there to demand and say, we are marching because we want a minimum pay. App delivery companies have dehumanized workers, right? And workers used to tell the story of how when they worked directly with the restaurants, when it was a cold day, they will always be able to stay inside, and the owners will always be able to say, you can have lunch. Don't worry, take care of yourself. And once the apps became the middlemen, it completely dehumanized, destroyed the relationship that they had had with the restaurants, to the fact that the restaurants completely disregarded them as workers and as people that existed. And the same situation with consumers, right? It destroyed the human relationship. And when Los Deliveristas started organizing and sharing their own stories, people came to understood that the people who's delivering the food is not the platform. It's a human being who's putting its own life at risk in order to ensure that you can stay at home safe.
What is the best way to build worker power right now?
By creating a safe space for workers to meet, especially in a unprecedented moment like we're living today with an anti-immigrant government who is not only destroying agencies and entire system that workers had rely on to get the bare minimum, but also terrorizing our neighborhoods by deploying masked men is terrifying and is scary. And right now, the way we have been committed to talking about what it means to be organizing in an anti-immigrant era, and also making sure how the organization can respond, right, to potential threats of ICE raids. There's a lot of cross solidarity in building to do among immigrant and non-immigrant workers who are living in our cities, who we strongly believe have a lot of power if they come together at defending and supporting each other and building that work together.
Idolo, Brian, and Ligia all believe that unions, in some form, are the way to build worker power. But our next guest thinks we need a solution beyond union organizing. Les Leopold is the executive director of the Labor Institute and author of the 2024 book, Wall Street's War on Workers: How Mass Layoffs and Greed Are Destroying the Working Class and What to Do About It. He also collaborated on a recent multi-state survey resulting in a report titled Democrats, Rust Belt Struggles, and the Promise of Independent Politics. Unions are a part of the story of the working class in the United States. It's a complicated history. There's been and there are fractures between and within unions, but many see them as the best hope for workers to build power. What is your take on this?
They could be. I mean, right now in the private sector, only 6% of the workforce, 5.9%, are unionized. So that means 94% are not unionized. And you have to have some way to deal with workplace problems. If you don't have some sort of collective worker power, you've got zero chance of having, prevent discrimination, prevent all kinds of bad stuff from happening. So there's a yearning amongst all people right now. Highest percentage of support for unionization, ironically, is happening while unions are the smallest they've been since the 1870s, as far as I can tell, in terms of labor density. The problem I see is there's no quick fix to organizing more workers. It's not even a useful conversation, I think, to talk about all the ways that unions can now increase density. It's not going to happen with the current labor law. You have to have a collective bargaining contract. And to have a collective bargaining contract, you have to go through labor law. And that law is so tilted against working people. I just saw a statistic that most workers, I think it's a little bit of exaggeration, something like 34, 36% still don't have a first contract after 4 years. I mean, that's ridiculous. So how do you overcome this? It's going to take political power. And you can't get that political power within labor law. And the only way to break out labor law is politically. One of the things we tested in the survey, I made up an entirely new organization. It was called the Independent Workers Political Association. It was going to be independent of the two parties, and it just had 4 platform planks: increase the minimum wage to a livable wage, stop price gouging at pharmaceutical companies and food companies, the no layoff proposal at companies to get taxpayer money. And the 4th one was a real humdinger. It was a guaranteed job at a living wage. If the private sector can't provide it, the public sector shall. 57% supported that proposal. There is such alienation from the two parties that it's wide open. If unions came together and tried to build something new, they would have a tremendous opportunity to recruit new people in and give them a home and then get some political muscle. All they need to do is to win a dozen or so congressional districts under an independent workers' party. A dozen votes would control the House. It's not such a huge project. Then they could maybe start to leverage changes in labor law, make it fairer to organize unions. And then we could have a discussion about how screwed up unions are, how they have to deal with this and do that. But right now, it's not even a useful discussion. There are not enough of them around to worry about. What we have to worry about is how to build new political power.
I think a lot of people don't understand, just because we're hearing in the news that these workers are organizing, that doesn't mean because they recognize themselves as a union that they then get increased wages, better conditions, stable schedules. It still takes years before they might get the company to agree to the terms of a contract.
What I think is the process you're describing about the difficulties that workers are going to have to get a union, that's why the political aspect has to be brought up immediately, which is not only do you need a union, you need a new political party. The two go hand in hand. You're never going to have the power that you deserve at the workplace to get a decent contract. I mean, we're just talking about negotiating a decent contract. We're not saying it's, all of a sudden you're going to take over the company. This isn't all that radical. This is just very standard collective bargaining, but corporations don't want to even do the simplest stuff. They feel they don't have to. As Warren Buffett said, there's a class war and our side won. He's right. So the answer to that is the way to wage the proper working class war is to have a working class political entity. You can't trust the Democrats to do that. Our survey showed 70% of the voters of these 4 states had negative things to say about the Democratic Party. So you need an alternative. Otherwise, we're going to keep losing. Workers at the workplace are going to be losing, and everybody else is going to be losing, because the good thing about worker-oriented demands are they're universal. They automatically help the people at the bottom the most. So it's possible to build up worker power, but you got to concentrate on the red districts. Forget about blue or purple, because you might be acting as a spoiler and they don't need you in a blue area. That's where we need to focus. Until we do that, I think this workplace organizing is wonderful, but I think it's going to lead to frustration because you can't win.
So do we just give up on workplace organizing?
You never stop workplace organizing. You support it any which way you can. And even the independent efforts, they're going to need help until there's another political pressure on the whole system where we break out of the Democrats, form a new independent political association, and go after political power. That could help change the game. It's all, synergetic. So we need to have a place where people can go right now and be part of something that's working class oriented. There's this vacuum that has to be filled. The Amazon workers can't fill it. The Starbucks workers can't fill it. They got their hands full doing what they're doing. God bless them. And the same thing, on a larger scale, what the UAW is doing in the South. Look how hard it is for them to get a victory, and look what they're throwing at it. And I just want to make one more thing. I don't think it's a question of technique. There's been, reams of stuff written about, well, if they did this kind of community organizing, if they did that, or they did this, they would succeed. Maybe on the margin, they do a little bit better. But when you have labor law stacked against you and you've got to actually play by those rules, it's very, very hard. But that struggle has to go on, and we support it. But we need something else where people can go unencumbered by law.
Les thinks that odds are too stacked against unions under the current labor law, and that unions can only experience real growth with political power. And as Brian and Lihia noted, workers experience tangible changes when political conditions are favorable, whether from a major municipality city council or negotiations with state-level politicians. But we've also seen that getting politicians in office who will actually change conditions for working people is often thwarted by big money and power grabs. How do we get working-class politicians in positions of decision-making power? Given today's historically high support for unions, is economic populism the way to turn out voters? Or are the culture wars what's really driving election outcomes? It's a debate that didn't reach a clear conclusion after the presidential election. What do we know now that the dust has settled?
We wanted to explain what Latinos were rejecting about the Democrats. And that needn't mean that they're going to automatically flock to Trump and MAGA. There's got to be something positively attracting them toward right-wing populism. Interestingly, a lot of it was articulated around immigration.
That's coming up on Shifting Terrain. Shifting Terrain was executive produced by Amanda Cowper and myself, Rachel Rybacek. Audio mixing by Tina Toby Mack. Thank you to our guests, Idolo Medillas, Brian Dolber, Lihia Gualpa, and Les Leopold. Also, we'd love it if you'd rate, follow, and share the show.